Picture this. It's April in Georgia, and the air smells like cut grass and blooming azaleas. In the small town of Willow Creek, where everyone knows your name and most people's business, 17-year-old Lila Hart is living what seems like the perfect teenage dream. She's the golden girl, head cheerleader, honor student, the kind of person who remembers your birthday and makes you feel like you matter when she smiles at you in the hallway. Prom is just days away. Her dress is hanging in her closet, her hair appointment is booked, and her boyfriend Jake has been acting mysteriously all week, probably planning some grand proposal, her friends tease. But in small towns like Willow Creek, smiles can hide secrets, and popularity can breed something far more dangerous than gossip. Welcome back to True Crime Continent, where we explore the true crime stories that reveal the darkest corners of human nature. Today we're diving into a case that proves jealousy isn't just a deadly sin, it's a deadly weapon. So make sure you're subscribed because you won't want to miss the twisted details of what really happened to Lila Hart. But before we begin, I have to warn you, this isn't just another small-town murder case. This is the story of how quickly light can turn to darkness, how a prom queen's crown became a target on her back, and how sometimes the person who claims to be your friend is actually planning your funeral. Let's start from the beginning, on that last Friday before prom, when Lila Hart walked home from cheer practice completely unaware that someone was already planning her final weekend. The April sun was warm over Willow Creek, a small Georgia town where everyone knew each other's names and most people's business. In the afternoons, the air was scented with cut grass and the sweet tang of azaleas that grew along the white-fenced yards. The streets were quiet except for the occasional thud of a basketball in someone's driveway or the distant bark of a dog. For the high school seniors, there was only one thing on everyone's mind: prom. Lila Hart was the kind of girl you noticed without meaning to. At 17, she had a natural brightness, the kind that made her a favorite on the cheer squad and in the hallways of Willow Creek High. She wasn't just beautiful, though with her chestnut hair, green eyes, and infectious smile, she certainly was, but she had a way of making you feel like you mattered when she spoke to you. Teachers adored her, classmates trusted her, and even younger students looked up to her like a big sister. Her friends joked that she was the mayor of Willow Creek High. She knew everyone, and everyone knew her. She had a busy life: practices, tutoring, student council, babysitting her little brother, and volunteering at the animal shelter. In small towns like Willow Creek, that kind of popularity didn't come from being flashy. It came from showing up for people. That Friday afternoon, she was walking home from cheer practice with her best friend, Mia Torres. The two of them talked about dresses, hair appointments, and whether Jake Henderson, Lila's boyfriend of almost a year, was going to surprise her with some kind of grand proposal. He'd been acting strangely all week, distracted, his phone lighting up with messages he wouldn't explain. Lila brushed it off with a laugh, telling Mia, "Maybe he's just nervous. Guys are weird." But Mia noticed the way Lila's smile faltered when she thought no one was looking. That was the thing about Willow Creek. Smiles and gossip were both part of the air you breathed. And lately, whispers had been swirling about Jake. About who he was seen with after basketball practice. About messages that weren't meant to be seen. Lila didn't believe them, or maybe she didn't want to. That night, Lila had dinner with her mom, stepdad, and 8-year-old brother. They ate on the back porch, watching fireflies blink to life in the shadows of the yard. Her mom asked if she was nervous about prom. Lila laughed and said no, but inside, she felt the strange tension that had been following her all week. It was like a small thread pulling tighter, though she couldn't explain why. At 9 p.m., she texted Jake, "Can we hang out tomorrow? Just us." He replied 20 minutes later, "Yeah, I'll pick you up around 7. Nothing in the exchange suggested trouble, but Lila still stared at the message longer than she should have. Before bed, she scrolled through her phone, smiling at prom dress inspiration photos, then stopped on a picture from last year's homecoming. She and Jake, arms around each other, laughing. Her smile faded, replaced by an unshakable thought: something's off. Somewhere across town, in a darkened bedroom, someone else was scrolling too, but their focus was entirely on her. On where she went, who she was with, and what tomorrow might bring. Saturday morning came with the sound of lawnmowers and the smell of bacon drifting from open kitchen windows. Willow Creek was the kind of place where a quiet street could hide 100 conversations, most of them whispered, and most of them about someone you knew. Lila spent the morning running errands with her mom. They stopped at the local florist, where Mrs. Baxter, the owner, had already made a mental note of all the prom corsages and boutonnieres she'd be crafting that week. She winked at Lila and said, "Jake better have ordered something special for you." Lila laughed, but the question echoed in her head. Had he? On Main Street, shop owners waved from doorways. A group of younger cheerleaders spotted her and asked for advice about their routines. She crouched down to their level, smiling as she talked them through a new stunt. Moments like this were what people would remember about her. The way she made you feel seen, even if you were just a freshman in awe of a senior. By the afternoon, Lila was back home, sprawled on her bed, texting Mia. They joked about prom playlists and hairstyles until Mia's tone shifted. "Just be careful, okay? I don't like how Jake's been lately." Lila replied with a simple, "I'm fine." Promise. But promises in Willow Creek were fragile things. That evening, Lila got ready to meet Jake. She wore her favorite denim jacket over a floral dress, paired with the necklace her grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday. She checked her phone twice for messages, none came. At 7:05, Jake's car pulled up, the low rumble of his engine breaking the stillness of the neighborhood. They drove out toward Miller's Point, a wooded overlook popular with couples. The radio played softly, but the silence between them was louder. Jake's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed ahead. Lila tried to fill the space with small talk, but it was like throwing pebbles into a bottomless well. At the point, the sun was setting over the lake, painting the water in streaks of gold and crimson. It should have been romantic. Instead, there was a sharp edge to the air. Jake finally spoke. "We need to talk." The conversation that followed would never be heard by anyone else. No one would ever know the exact words, only that they were the last Lila would speak in the fading light. Sunday morning in Willow Creek began like any other, except for the unanswered calls to Lila's phone. Her mom assumed she was sleeping in, exhausted from a late night with friends. By noon, that assumption cracked when Mia texted asking why Lila hadn't shown up to help decorate the gym for prom. Mia's calls went straight to voicemail. That was when the unease began to spread, first in her mom's chest, then in the phone calls she made to neighbors, to friends, to Jake. Jake's voice was flat when he answered. "Yeah, I saw her last night. I dropped her off at home." But something about his tone set off alarms in Mia's head. By 3 p.m., Lila's mom called the police. Officer Daniels took the missing persons report, though his tone carried the practiced calm of someone who'd heard this before. Most teens turn up within 24 hours. But Willow Creek's tight-knit nature meant news traveled faster than the official channels. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, half the town knew Lila was missing. Volunteers gathered in the church parking lot with flashlights and bottled water. They combed through the woods, calling her name into the encroaching dark. Somewhere out there, in the shifting shadows and cool night air, lay the truth, and it would shatter Willow Creek. The news that Lila hadn't come home spread faster than the storm clouds gathering over Willow Creek. By nightfall, the woods at the edge of town were alive with movement, volunteers, neighbors, and off-duty officers armed with flashlights and lanterns. Their beams cut through the dark like thin swords, searching every shadow for a flash of blonde hair or the glimmer of a sequined cheer jacket. "Lila!" Voices echoed into the trees, growing hoarse with each call. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, straining against its leash as its handler pushed deeper into the undergrowth. Rain began to fall in a fine, misty drizzle, turning the dirt paths into slick ribbons. People slipped, caught themselves, and kept going. No one wanted to be the one who gave up first. Sheriff Greer moved among them, speaking in low tones, urging caution but never letting the pace slow. Every lead mattered, a bent branch here, a shoe print there, but the woods swallowed clues as easily as it swallowed sound. By midnight, the air smelled of wet earth and flashlight batteries running low. The chill seeped into bones. Margaret Keaton and her husband David refused to stay at home, despite Greer's urging. Margaret clutched a photo of her daughter, Lila on her 17th birthday, grinning with a cake in her hands, as if showing it to the trees might make them give her back. Her eyes darted at every movement, every shadow, until David gently steered her back toward the roadside. By 2 a.m., the first wave of volunteers began to falter. "We'll start again at first light," Greer told them, though he knew most would still dream of flashlights and branches snapping in the dark. People drifted back to their homes, their faces pale and drawn, as if they feared what morning might bring. The police kept going. Searchlights were rigged near the Treeline. Officers moved methodically, marking areas with bright tape, questioning the few late-night passers-by about what they'd seen 2 evenings earlier. Some swore they'd seen Lila heading toward the old bridge. Others remembered nothing, just a blur of rain and headlights. Back at the Keaton home, the living room light burned all night. Margaret sat in her armchair, her phone in her lap, waiting for it to ring. Every sound outside, the rumble of a car, a knock at the door, made her sit up straighter, certain it was Lila coming home. David kept his hand on her shoulder, a silent anchor against the tides of fear. The next morning brought more volunteers, dogs, and news crews setting up near the police barricades. Greer's voice was sharp with fatigue, but steady with resolve. They expanded the search to the riverbanks and fields beyond town. Still nothing. By the end of the second day, hope had frayed at the edges. Then came the call over the radio. A jogger had spotted something pale in the reeds by the water. Greer's heart sank before he even arrived. 2 days of searching had ended, not with the joyful reunion Margaret had clung to in her living room, but with the quiet, irreversible truth lying at the edge of Willow Creek River. Morning in Willow Creek came slowly, as if the town itself didn't want to wake up. Mist clung to the river, rolling over the banks like ghostly fingers. A local jogger, Daniel McCrae, cut through the trail with his headphones in, eyes on the dirt path. He'd run this route every day for 5 years, but this morning, his foot caught on something protruding from the wet grass near the bend. He stumbled, pulling his earbuds out, and that's when he saw it. A pale hand. For a frozen second, his mind tried to make it something else, a mannequin maybe, or trash washed up by the current. But the purple-painted fingernails, chipped from wear, made his stomach turn. Daniel's voice cracked as he called 911, pacing in circles as if he could unsee it. The dispatcher's calm tone only made the reality worse. "Stay there, sir. Help is on the way." Within minutes, squad cars arrived. Officer Maria Keller, who'd been on the night search, was first on scene. She didn't need to get closer to know. Her shoulders sagged. "Oh, Lila," she whispered, barely audible over the gurgling river. Word spread faster than the sirens. A crowd formed along the taped-off bank, neighbors, students, parents holding their children tight. No one said the word dead, but everyone felt it sitting heavy in the damp air. Back on Willow Street, in the Keaton home, the phone rang. Margaret Keaton had been making coffee, Jake's photo still taped to the fridge beside Lila's prom dress fitting receipt. She answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was slow, rehearsed, careful, but Margaret heard what wasn't being said. No, please tell me she's all right," she begged. Richard Keaton, sitting at the kitchen table, stood when he heard her tone. His coffee spilled across the paper as Margaret collapsed against the wall, the receiver clattering to the floor. By the time they arrived at the riverbank, Lila's body had already been covered. Margaret broke past the officers, clawing at the sheet until Richard pulled her back. "That's not our girl," Margaret sobbed, as if refusing to name the truth could undo it. The coroner's van pulled away in silence. Every pair of eyes followed it until it vanished down Main Street, swallowed by the morning fog. In the hours that followed, Willow Creek moved like it was underwater. The high school canceled classes. The diner served coffee for free, but no one drank it. Conversations dropped into whispers, then stopped entirely when a Keaton walked by. And for the first time in 2 days, the town knew where Lila Keaton was. But knowing didn't make anything better. The rain hadn't stopped since the morning Lila's body was found. It drummed against the roof of Willow Creek High, where the hallways stood eerily quiet. Students trickled in for the first time since the news, their voices low, glances darting toward the empty desk in the second row of room 104. By then, everyone knew the official cause, strangulation. Sheriff Greer hadn't wanted to release the details so soon, but the autopsy left little doubt. Bruising along her neck, defensive wounds on her hands. She had fought. In the Keaton home, Margaret clung to that word, fought, as if it proved something about her daughter's courage. She sat in Lila's room, the prom dress still hanging from her closet door, fingertips brushing over the shimmer of sequins. She imagined Lila standing in front of the mirror, hair curled, laughing at her own reflection. That laugh had been stolen, and Margaret's grief was already turning to rage. At the station, detectives reviewed statements. Jake Lawson, Lila's boyfriend, had been questioned twice. He was pale, nervous, but his alibi held. He'd been at his cousin's house the night she disappeared. Still, whispers swirled. He'd been distant lately. Maybe there had been a fight. Maybe jealousy had boiled over. But another name began to surface, quieter, carried in murmurs between lockers and over lunch tables. Amber Hayes. She'd joined the cheer squad only a month earlier and had quickly attached herself to Jake, first as a friend, then as something more. Everyone had seen the way she looked at Lila, like a shadow trying to block out the sun. At the diner, two waitresses leaned against the counter, watching the rain through the window. "I heard Amber was the last one to see her," one whispered. "Before or after she went missing? Does it matter?" Girls got ice in her eyes. Across town, Amber sat on her bed, scrolling through news articles about Lila's death. She stared at the photos, Lila in her cheer uniform, smiling under the Friday night lights, then at her own reflection in the darkened phone screen. A slow smile spread across her face, one that didn't belong to grief. The sheriff didn't have enough to bring her in, yet, but the gut feeling in his chest was tightening. He'd seen jealousy before. It burned quieter than rage, but when it finally erupted, it left bodies behind. In Willow Creek, grief had given way to suspicion, and suspicion was a fire that, once lit, would burn until it found the truth. Sheriff Greer stared at the stack of reports on his desk. Each statement was a thread, and somewhere in that tangled mess was the knot that would unravel the truth. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky still hung low and gray over Willow Creek. Detective Maria Keller entered, a file in her hand. "Got something," she said, setting it down. "Witness says they saw Lila near the old footbridge the night she went missing, and she wasn't alone." Greer flipped open the file. The description wasn't Jake, too short, hair too light, but it matched someone else. Someone whose name had been whispered more and more lately. Amber Hayes. He remembered her from the interviews. Perfect posture, perfect hair, and that strange calm that didn't sit right. When he'd told her about Lila's death, she hadn't asked how it happened. She'd only asked when. Greer called her in. She arrived with her stepmother, dressed in a crisp sweater like she was going to church, not a police station. In the interrogation room, Maria started gently, asking about her cheer practices, her friendship with Lila, the night of the disappearance. Amber's answers were smooth at first, but there were tiny cracks, a twitch in her jaw, a pause before saying she'd been home all night. Maria let the silence stretch, the ticking clock filling the space until Amber blurted, "I didn't even see her after the pep rally." Maria's eyes didn't leave her. "Funny, because someone saw you with her. At the bridge." Amber's lips parted, but no words came out. But since they didn't have much evidence, they let her go, without further questioning. The next day, evidence techs were combing through items pulled from the riverbank. Among the mud-caked debris was a single silver charm, a cheerleading megaphone, still clinging to a broken chain which Jake had given it to Lila for her birthday, was also found on the riverbank. The chain had snapped, and embedded in the clasp under layers of grime were fibers, not from Lila's jacket, but from a sweater identical to the one Amber had worn the night of the pep rally. When the lab report came back, Greer didn't waste time. He and Maria drove to Amber's house, their cruiser tires crunching on the gravel driveway. She was on the porch, sipping soda like it was any other afternoon. "Amber Hayes," Greer said, stepping out of the car. "We need you to come with us." Her smile faltered. "What for?" "Because," Greer said, his voice low but unshakable, "we finally know who was with Lila when she died." The interrogation room was dim, the overhead light casting a pale circle on the table. Amber sat across from Detective Maria Keller, her hands folded neatly, though her nails tapped an uneven rhythm on the metal surface. Sheriff Greer leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his gaze heavy. Maria slid the charm bracelet across the table. "Recognize this?" Amber's eyes flicked to it for a second too long before she shook her head. "No, it's Lila's," Maria said. "Found it near where she was killed. Your sweater fibers were on it." Amber's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the light above. Then she laughed, soft, breathless, wrong. "You all think she was perfect," Amber said, her voice low. "You don't know what it's like to stand next to someone like that. Everyone looking at her, talking about her, Jake always smiling when she walked into the room. And me? Invisible. Always invisible." Maria didn't move. "Tell me what happened, Amber." Amber's gaze drifted, unfocused, as if she was watching it unfold in her head. "After the pep rally, I told her Jake was looking for her. Said he wanted to talk by the bridge. She believed me. She always believed me." Her voice trembled, but not from remorse, from something darker. "She got there, and I told her the truth. That Jake didn't need her anymore. That he'd moved on." Amber's fingers clenched around each other. "She laughed at me. Said I was just the rebound friend. Like I was some charity case." Maria's jaw tightened. And then, Amber's breath hitched. She tried to walk away. I grabbed her. We struggled. She kept saying my name, telling me to let go. But she wouldn't shut up. I just pressed harder. And then she was quiet. Sheriff Greer's voice cut through the stillness. "You strangled her because she was with Jake." Amber met his eyes, and for the first time, her mask slipped completely. "No, Sheriff. I strangled her because she thought she was untouchable." Maria didn't break eye contact. "How did she end up at the riverbank?" Amber's voice lowered. "There's an old trail from the bridge to the river. Nobody uses it much. I dragged her there. It was dark, no one saw me. I thought the current would take her away, make it look like she fell in. But she got caught on the bank." Her fingers twitched as she spoke. "I kept thinking, if I could just get her into the water, it'd be over. No one would ever know." Greer's hands tightened at his sides. "But we did know." Amber's shoulders lifted in a small shrug, almost defiant. "Guess I wasn't as invisible as I thought." Silence fell heavy in the room. Maria stood, sliding the chair back. "Amber Hayes, you're under arrest for the murder of Lila Keaton." As they let her out, the weight in Greer's chest didn't lift. They had their killer, but justice felt hollow. Outside, night had fallen over Willow Creek, and the street lamps cast long shadows that seemed to follow them. Somewhere, in the quiet of the Keaton home, Margaret still sat in her daughter's room, whispering a prayer Lila would never hear. The church bells tolled slow and heavy, their echoes spilling out across Willow Creek. The morning sky was an unbroken gray, the kind that seemed to press down on the town itself. People moved in quiet clusters toward St. Mary's Cemetery, their black coats and umbrellas blurring together like shadows. Margaret Keaton clung to her husband's arm, her other hand gripping the folded white cheerleading uniform that had been found in Lila's bedroom. She hadn't let it go since the night they got the call. The faint scent of her daughter's perfume still clung to the fabric. Jake stood apart from the crowd, his hair wet from the drizzle, eyes locked on the casket. He hadn't spoken more than a sentence since Amber's arrest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lila at the pep rally, laughing, spinning, before the image dissolved into the cold, still face they'd shown him for identification. The coffin was small enough to remind everyone she was only 17. White roses lay on top, their petals trembling in the breeze. The pastor's voice carried over the murmur of rain, speaking of hope and heaven, but his words seemed to fade into the dull roar of grief. Margaret stepped forward first. Her knees nearly buckled, but Thomas steadied her as she placed the cheerleading uniform gently inside the casket. She whispered something no one else could hear. Her lips trembled, and her shoulders shook in silent sobs. Jake followed, a single rose in his hand. He hesitated, fingers tightening around the stem, then placed it beside the uniform. He bowed his head and whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have walked you home that night." Behind them, classmates in their own cheer jackets stood shoulder to shoulder, their mascara running with the rain. One girl clutched Lila's megaphone and couldn't bring herself to let go. Sheriff Greer kept to the back, his hat low, the brim hiding his eyes. He had been to too many funerals in his 25 years on the force, but this one cut differently. He kept thinking about Amber's words in the interrogation room, about how hatred could take root in such young soil and grow strong enough to kill. The casket was lowered slowly, the sound of the ropes creaking against wood filling the silence. The first shovelful of dirt hit, with a muffled thud that made Margaret flinch. One by one, people stepped forward, each dropping in a flower or a handful of earth, until the grave was covered in a blanket of white and red. As the mourners began to drift away, the Keatons stayed, kneeling at the fresh mound. Margaret's voice broke as she prayed aloud, her words carried away by the wind. Jake lingered at the edge of the cemetery, watching them. His face was pale, lips pressed tight. When Sheriff Greer approached, Jake asked without looking at him, "Does it ever stop hurting?" Greer's answer was quiet, almost swallowed by the rain. "No, you just learn to carry it." Somewhere in town, Amber Hayes sat alone in a cell, staring at the same gray sky through a barred window. But in Willow Creek, it felt as if the sun itself had been buried that day. The courthouse in Willow Creek had never seen so many people. Every seat in the gallery was filled, every hallway lined with reporters, microphones ready to catch a glimpse of the story that had gripped the town for months. Amber Hayes entered in shackles, her once perfect blonde hair dull and tangled, her orange jumpsuit stark against her pale skin. She didn't look at the crowd, though whispers followed her like shadows. At the prosecution's table sat photographs, not just of Lila smiling in her cheer uniform, but of the crime scene. The riverbank, the muddied footprints, the charm bracelet tangled in weeds. Those images had been the prosecution's weapon, the cold proof that stripped away every excuse Amber's defense tried to build. Lila's parents sat in the front row, Margaret clutching her husband's hand so tightly his knuckles whitened. They didn't flinch when the medical examiner testified about the bruises on Lila's neck, the ligature marks, or the mud embedded in her hair from being dragged to the river. Jake took the stand, voice shaking as he told the jury about the night she vanished, how Amber had misled her with a fake message from him. He didn't look at Amber once. Amber's lawyer tried to argue diminished capacity, jealousy spiraling into a crime of passion. But the prosecution painted a different picture, calculated deceit, a deliberate plan to lure Lila, kill her, and dispose of her body. The fibers, the trail to the river, Amber's own confession, it all pointed in one direction. When the jury filed back into the courtroom after only 3 hours of deliberation, the air was so still it felt like no one dared breathe. The foreman's voice was clear. "We find the defendant, Amber Hayes, guilty of murder in the first degree." Amber didn't react. No tears, no collapse, just a vacant stare toward the far wall. Judge Holloway's sentencing came swiftly. "Amber Hayes, for the premeditated murder of Lila Keaton, you are hereby sentenced to 40 years in the state correctional facility. You will not be eligible for parole for 35 years. Margaret closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she exhaled. It wasn't peace, but it was an end. 2 weeks later, Sheriff Greer walked through the narrow halls of the state prison, his boots echoing off the cinder-block walls. He had told himself he didn't need to see her again, but the truth was the case still gnawed at him, the why sitting in his chest like a stone. Amber sat at the visitation table, her hands cuffed. She looked smaller now, almost fragile, but her eyes were sharp. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. Greer sat across from her. "I keep replaying it, Amber. You could have walked away, but you didn't. You chose to kill her." Amber tilted her head, as if considering whether to answer. "You think locking me in here changes anything? She's still dead." Greer's jaw tightened. "No, but it stops you from hurting anyone else." She leaned forward slightly, voice low. "Sheriff, you remember that night by the river? The mud, the weeds, the smell of the water? That's where she's staying, even after you put her in the ground." Something in his chest cracked. He pushed back from the table and left without another word, the sound of the river in his memory louder than her voice. That night, Sheriff Greer sat alone in his office, the crime scene photographs spread out before him. The riverbank, the rope, the pale hand reaching from the mud. The case was closed. The killer was behind bars. But Willow Creek would never be the same, and neither would he. As Sheriff Greer sat alone that final night, surrounded by photographs that would haunt him forever, Willow Creek had learned a truth that many small towns discover too late. Evil doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it grows quietly in the shadows of Friday night football games and prom committees, fed by jealousy, so consuming it transforms a 17-year-old girl into a killer. Amber Hayes is now serving her 40-year sentence, but the real tragedy isn't just that Lila Keaton's life was stolen at 17. It's that in a town where everyone knew everyone, nobody saw the darkness growing in plain sight. Lila's infectious smile, her kindness to younger students, her way of making everyone feel seen. All of that was extinguished because someone couldn't bear to live in her shadow. This case reminds us that jealousy is perhaps one of humanity's most dangerous emotions. Unlike rage, which burns hot and fast, jealousy is a slow poison that corrupts everything it touches. It convinces us that someone else's happiness is the reason for our pain, that their light somehow dims our own. But the truth is far simpler and far more tragic. Amber Hayes didn't kill Lila because Lila had something she wanted. She killed her because she couldn't stand the reflection of her own emptiness when she looked at someone who was genuinely loved. In a world of social media and constant comparison, Lila's story serves as a stark warning. The person sitting next to you, smiling and laughing, might be drowning in a jealousy so deep they're willing to destroy rather than build, to take rather than create. But here's what haunts me most about this case, and I want to know what you think. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Were there warning signs that the adults in Willow Creek missed? Or was Amber Hayes already too far gone the moment she decided that Lila's existence was a personal attack on her own worth? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think jealousy-driven murders like this are becoming more common in our comparison-obsessed culture? And what would you have done if you were Mia, Lila's best friend, and noticed those subtle changes in the weeks before prom? If this story left you as unsettled as it left me, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We dive deep into true crime stories from the darkest corners of the world, cases that reveal not just what happened, but why it matters. Because sometimes, understanding the darkness is the only way to protect the light. Until next time, stay safe out there. Evil doesn't always announce itself with a scream. Sometimes it whispers with a smile.